We are live. We are live. This is all running.
Usually, but see, we're the same way. We hear how hot it gets in Kenya. It's preemptively melts. We're like, no, we can't handle that. So, no, we have some 25 every day. We're all over
That's good. Yeah, you might find some seeds. You might not actually. That's good. Okay. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Time to hi, Don. So time to get moving. I know some of you have been in this room 4 hours today already. So thank you very much, particularly you, for coming back and coming for another hour. This is the first of the new series of yours seminars, which is an annual series that's been running now since 2011. And it's a series that was set up really to try to create a forum for people to discuss relevant current heritage issues that align with the teaching that we do here, but which also has relevance beyond the department. So we made it very clear right from the outset that we were welcoming people in from local heritage organisations, for example, former students from other parts of the university, our undergraduates and our postgraduates and so forth. So it's a very open forum. The majority are often from our master's programmes, as I think is probably the case this evening as well, but it's great to see a very diverse audience, and a number of our alumni are here as well, which is always nice to see. So thank you very much. There's a really good programme this year, runs through the autumn and the spring terms. I'm sure you've seen it online already. I think there are a couple of gaps in the programme, but that's all as a seminar most weeks, in fact. And this is the format. This isn't just a start of term thing, having the wine. This is a regular thing. So do please come along to these seminars if you wish to do so. So to get us up and running this week, delighted to welcome back to the department Neil Redfern from Historic England, Principal Inspector of Ancient Monuments with Historic England. And Neil has for a long time been a very close friend of the department. He's a member of our advisory board that we have in the department, made up of a number of people who work outside of the university but help us with a number of sort of strategic initiatives and advice and so forth. And Neil is a very important part of that team and has been very helpful to us on a number of issues regarding employability, for instance. And I've known Neil a long time. We go back to Defence of Britain project days, if any of you remember the Defence of Britain project when I worked for English Heritage as it was, and Neil worked for the Defence of Britain project. So we go back quite a long way, and then we sort of separated a bit and our paths kept crossing and stuff, and then we both found ourselves in York, and we've had quite a lot to do with each other since then in terms of working together. And as I say, Neil's been a great friend of the department. He supports our placement students and things like that. So great to welcome Neil back. Neil will have some very interesting and very provocative things to say, I have no doubt. And so I'm going to hand over to Neil now to talk about archaeology. Where next?
Okay, thank you, John. Excellent. Right, thanks, everybody. Right, the first problem I have is IT's not working. I've been told I'm not allowed to move from this space.
No, that big space. You get the big space.
Because I'm being filmed. Which, if you sort of know me, I'm dyslexic and I can't stand conformity because it just freaks me out and I'll lose where I'm at. And the first thing that's really let me down is when I was wanting to illustrate my presentation, I thought, how to do it? How do I illustrate what I think archaeology should do next and where it should go? And the only conclusion I could come up with is I had to show you every single photograph I've ever taken in my job. But I didn't want you to see them in order, okay? Because actually in my head, there is no order. They're completely scattered and they're all over the place. But unfortunately, this has now ordered it. So this is like going back in time. When I first started thinking about how to present it to you, I spoke to Keith Emmerich, who's my colleague, who's also been deeply embedded in the department. And he's, the thing we decided on is I wasn't going to be negative to start off with. And it's just all failed. Okay, but so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just play this slideshow in the background. But the other reason why I didn't want it actually to be in an order is I don't want to look at the photographs. If I do, I'll just get inside them because every single photograph has a story. Okay, and actually the first two it will probably illustrate everything I'm going to say and illustrate why I get irritated about some things and why I get actually irritated about archaeologists. Okay, this is Beacon Ring in Wales. Okay, it is a fantastic Iron Age hill fort. However, the owner in 1953 decided to celebrate the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II by planting trees in this really interesting manner, so that twice a year, leaves coming out, leaves falling off, different colour vegetation, you can actually see E2R printed on the landscape. A brilliantly creative thing to do. This featured on the television this weekend. I'm so dull. I should have been at John's, but I was watching television. It was Tony Robinson. Don't even go there while I was doing it. Lots of other stuff going on. But he was walking Offers Dyke, and he came across this, and he met the archaeologist. And the archaeologist said, what a fantastic, fantastic Iron Age hill fort. So fantastic, we're actually going to cut all these trees off it, and we're going to put it down to upland grass again, because that's what we think it would have been and would have been right. Just like that. Just got rid of someone's creativity. I just couldn't understand it. Why do archaeologists do it? Why do they feel archaeology is so blooming precious, yeah, that they can't look at it in different ways and they can't engage with it in different ways? And it entirely symbolises what I'm actually going to talk about now. Anyway, I'm going to set those off so you can have a look at those. Unfortunately, I've got the notes, which is really dull. I know, but I'm going to try and actually stick to these because there's a real flow to what I'm actually going to talk about today. And really, it is a reflection of the last 30 years of archaeology in England, and in particular, archaeology as practiced under a planning guidance called PPG 16. This was introduced in 1990, and it was a fundamental shift in England. It actually took archaeology away from being something that was state-sponsored and actually put it into the area of development management. So actually anyone who is developing something impacted on archaeology, they would actually have to pay for the consequences of dealing with it. It was a huge shift, okay? Basically known as developer pays. And what I'm actually going to do is just have a look at how this has developed over the last 30 years and also ask some questions, because now, 30 years on, the archaeological sector, the community, particularly the professional community, are in a sense, to my mind, crying foul. They're saying archaeology in England is in crisis. Why? Because there aren't enough archaeologists. Okay? Great news for you lot, lots of jobs, okay? The jobs market out there is enormous, okay? There really are not enough archaeologists in this country. But is that the answer? Let's have a look and let's explore it. The first thing I would say, this cultural shift 30 years ago, the best thing is I've absolutely benefited from it. My entire career has actually been made out of this change. Okay, I have worked in the professional archaeological sector for 30 years. I have made some really amazing archaeological discoveries. Whoa, do you know what? best thing in the world? I have the fingers, okay? I don't know what it is, but, you know, really good things come to light when I'm actually around and on my watch. It's absolutely fantastic. It's not random. It just happens, okay? When I go places, stuff comes out of the ground. It causes lots of problems and I cost lots of money. It's really quite exciting. Okay. I do say to people they should really keep me away from their archaeological site because if you get me anywhere near, you really will find something juicy and something exciting. I have met loads of inspirational archaeologists. Okay, I've actually been really privileged to work with groundbreaking scientists, people who will extract every last little morsel of knowledge out of a thing. Yeah, they'll go in tiny detail. Yeah, and they'll just pull it all apart into molecules. They'll talk about stuff I don't even understand. And from that, we can make amazing stories and amazing narratives. Okay. I have been to amazing places. A lot of them in Yorkshire. Yorkshire is the greatest place on the universe. You don't have to go anywhere else to do archaeology. You can actually do it here and see the lot and be really engaged and make a lifelong career out of it. I have met some of the most amazing communities, the most amazing people, people who are fascinated by their own story, the story of their place, the story of where they come from. And, you know, to be honest, I've met some really clever and thought-provoking developers. People who actually want to make money out of the land that I'm actually interested in looking at. And actually, who will actually help me look after what I want to look after and uncover what I want to look after. So I've been really, really fortunate. But I also find myself deeply unsatisfied about what we do, why we do it, and just how actual little impact we have in society. Okay? I think archaeologists fundamentally are playing way below where they should be. Okay? We just don't have any impact. I'm really concerned that archaeology in England is defined by archaeologists, for archaeologists, with outputs only overwhelmingly for archaeologists only. Whilst we do this under this strange mask called public benefit, in reality, our approach to archaeology as a sector is continuation of the approach we set up under PPG 16 30 years ago, and it's extremely inward-looking. All the language is about experts. All the language is about archaeological interest and archaeological value. The public don't really feature. I also think this approach is frankly really boring. If you actually do parts of my job every single day, it's seriously tedious. Okay, and I just think it could be a little bit more fun if we viewed it in a different way. Implementing this approach, though, is also becoming very, very problematic for several reasons. The sheer volume of material we are now trying to excavate is placing massive strains on parts of the process. Okay, the sector is crying crisis because they feel they need more resources just to maintain the status quo of doing what we're actually doing again, to keep doing what we decided we wanted to do 30 years ago. Interestingly, I don't actually see this as a crisis. I actually see it as a product of a discipline that's so inward-looking, okay, that they've forgotten how to look outward. And that actually, if we could manage to look outward, we wouldn't see a crisis, we'd actually see an awful lot of opportunity. And actually we need, in doing that, to ask what it is we as archaeologists do, who we do it for, who we do it for, how we do it, and why we do it. It's actually a real question about what our purpose is. What do we want our purpose to be? So in many ways, this paper is actually just a distillation of what I've learned over the last 20 years, 28 years, all this stuff here, okay, that's been kicking around in my head. But it's also a lot more. It's about how we engage in exploring the material culture of past generations. It's about the present. It's about who we are, how we define meaning in the present, how we engage in the archaeology of this country, and how we discuss it. It's fundamentally about heritage management and what archaeology actually has to offer for a dynamic and creative sector. Heritage management is about creativity. That's something you're going to hear me say quite a lot, and I'll come back to that as we move on. This paper is about how archaeology absolutely should look to redefine its outputs if it wants to maximise its impact. If we really want to have an impact in society, we've got to ask what it is we are actually doing. It's also deeply about my frustration with archaeologists. Okay, unfortunately, I am actually officially employed as an archaeologist for Historic England, but really I do heritage management. But actually, heritage management in some respects is a bit of a dirty word, because you don't get a doctorate in heritage management that quickly. It's not really perceived as something you actually do. And I can actually remember sitting in a room with our former chief executive, and we were talking about placement students, and we were talking about MAs, and I kid you not, he laughed and said, ha ha ha, who's got one of those? And I pointed out, well, actually, I've got one from the University of Cambridge. And he just went quiet. And it was just this idea that actually it's almost heritage management is a bit of a dirty subject, really, because it's not really proper academic. So again, something we really need to explore there. Okay. We do need to actually understand the current approach a little bit more, okay, because it's not without its benefits. And understanding the context in which it was introduced is really important. So the shift from state to developer-led funding was a fundamental requirement at the time in 1990. Okay, prior to that, it was Historic England through direct government grants that effectively were paying for the archaeology to be done in this country when development was threatening it. Okay, and it was also seen as bringing it in line with other environmental sectors. Okay, so again, mitigation in the natural environment was quite well done by developers already, and so it's just seemingly bringing the historic environment into that line. However, the sector, the discipline as a whole, and public perception of archaeology in those 30 years has shifted massively. Okay, our entire foundations have actually moved in that time. In part, that's the success of PPG 16, the amount of archaeology that's been going on. But it's also because of the increased professionalism in the sector, because of the commerciality of the archaeological sector. And these things have grown. In some senses, they've got better. But at the same time, that has led to a really huge gulf emerging between professional archaeology and academic archaeology. The two just don't seem to sit next to each other terribly well anymore. And then, if you bring the third sector in, the public, there is a seemingly even larger split as to what the public might want in terms of archaeology and what they would actually want to look at. And you've got to understand, since 1990, that shift in public interest in archaeology has gone stratospheric. It's gone absolutely through the roof. Okay, how do we keep up with that? But the public aren't asking to do the archaeology we want to do. The public are saying we want our archaeology done. How do we actually meet them on a level playing field and talk to them about that? Really, how do we help them unlock their own places and their own stories? So I do think there are benefits from the PPG 16 process, but I also think there are real challenges. It's absolutely not capable of meeting the development challenges of the 21st century. And it's certainly not capable of meeting the public perception of engaging in archaeology and heritage management. And partly the problem is PPG 16 was never able to do that. It was never about those things. PPG 16 was fundamentally a straight way of getting the government off the hook for paying for archaeology and putting it onto a development sector. That's really what it was about. It wasn't about public engagement. It wasn't about academic excellence. Okay, these are things that we really need to push it towards and ask for it to actually look at. But what concerns me most about PPG 16 is how some of the key concepts behind it have now become so institutionalised in the thinking of heritage management and archaeology that they are wielded like a set of unbreakable laws. Okay? These laws are used to maintain the right of archaeologists to keep digging, to keep them employed, to keep them churning the mill, creating more and more stuff, with seemingly no thought as to why or what, who, what or how they're actually doing it. Or indeed, they seem to have no thought whatsoever at the point of digging, or what the hell they're going to do with it to look after it for the future, or how that might happen. It just seemingly goes into these brown cardboard boxes, some mythical nirvana where it's going to get looked after in the future. The preeminence of this process can be attributed to three key concepts in my mind. all enshrined in PPG 16. Firstly, archaeology is a finite and non-renewable resource. Once we lose it, it's gone forever. Okay? Preservation and protection. The preservation and protection of archaeological sites and knowledge is our primary purpose. We must protect everything forever. And finally, but when we do this, we must create records. I've never come across a discipline more obsessed with lists. Lists of absolutely everything you can possibly imagine. Archives that just come overflowing with boxes of materials and stuff we've written about. Stuff we've written about what we've dug up. All this material must be archived and it must be stored for future generations. We must have our historic environment record, our sites and monuments record. We must have all our museums. Now, I wouldn't say these aren't worthy aspirations, and I do generally want an archaeologist to do stuff properly, okay? But I just don't think they fit with a broader definition of archaeology as the study of humanity and its past. This isn't studying the past, this is ordering the past. This is putting it into its neatness. It's tidying my blooming slides up, okay? It's not necessarily about that, okay? It's about us and who we are. Archaeologists study the things that were created, used, or changed by humans. To do this, we study the material remains, the stuff they left behind. We often draw on contemporary societies and experience to shed light on those that flourished or struggled in the world before us. This is a constant dialogue, it's a constant conversation. We need to think about how we want to explore that. To me, archaeology is absolutely of the present. It's not about the past. It's a process that we do today, and it actually totally reflects present values, who we are. It often tells us more about who we are and what we want as society than it ever answers about the past. And we've got to remember that. We've got to remember the here and now of archaeology. And what really worries me is the three concepts I mentioned earlier have actually become an end in themselves rather than the beginning. They are the process. They're the thing we want to create. We want to create the archive. We want to create the preservation. We want to create the lists. Sometimes it so frustrates me. I've got to resort to Harry Potter here, and actually that these three things are actually the unforgivable curses. Okay, they are that bad. All right, and we really need to stop thinking of the world in this way. In my experience, the number of archaeological sites has never diminished. Okay, it's not finite and non-renewable. It's entirely the opposite. The more we look, the more we find. The more ways we've developed of finding things, the more that stuff comes out of the woodwork. We've developed more and more techniques to actually ask questions about the past. We've broadened our horizons about what heritage actually is. We've broadened what we want to define as meaning of heritage. The level of interaction we have with places, how we want to talk about them, has just increased timefold. Nothing about this conversation is finite. Archaeology as a process has never been busier. It's really an ever-growing playing field of engagement and activity, where the interaction of people and the cultural material of the past create new meanings, create new values in the present about who we are and how we want to look at things. It's a constant evolving process, and at the heart of it is cultural value and meaning. It's not preservation, fact and artifact. We've got to really get much better at understanding these processes. I also actually hope we're creating some new archaeology somewhere, okay? Some new paths that someone else might be interested in looking at one day, and we're not all just thinking that the past only ever happened before us, and that actually we're actively thinking about what we do in the present. I have some colleagues who would actually say, yes, Neil, that's called good design, good designed buildings. Maybe we want to celebrate those as well. And actually, I really do agree with them when we actually look at them. So, after 30 years, these concepts, to me, should be seen as fundamentally misplaced. They've actually boxed us into a reactionary and negative outlook. In many ways, they've stifled our purpose. Personally, they've given us a philosophical straitjacket we can't get out of. Preservation, finite, non-renewable resource. I'm not allowed to touch it. Oh God, I've got to lose that. We get paranoid that actually loss is failure. It's, you know, actually, as an archaeologist, you can't learn something without losing it, without actually destroying it. Otherwise, you'd never put your trowel in the ground. Okay, and I think again, this is something we've really got to get more happy with and more comfortable with. So I argue that we really need to refocus. We need to refocus on the cultural value of our interventions, the knowledge gain, the social gain, the understanding we get from these interventions, the discussions we create, the conversations we set up about it. The fun of just doing it, you know, finding stuff's blooming exciting. It really is, yeah? And actually, you know, the energy that you generate out of that process is really quite extraordinary. And these are outputs that we should be celebrating and making so much more of, okay? I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because the straitjacket is seriously tight and fast. You know, we are really stuck into this idea about preservation. And, you know, where preservation goes is this extraordinary concept that we're going to do preservation in situ. It's all right. We can leave it under this very, very big road, and someone in the future will come and dig it up. Well, I don't know the last time the A1 was actually dug up in the last 60 years. Yeah, it's rubbish. We're not going back to it when we put it under some of these big things. Stuff in York is so far under the ground, okay, that we're not going down there because the cost to get there is so huge. Is it being preserved in situ? Frankly, we have no idea at all. Okay, we hope it is, but we don't really know. So we've got this idea of preservation in situ. Oh, but you see, what do we do? We actually have to dig something up because the nasty developer's going to destroy it. Oh, well, we'll dig as little as possible. We'll sample it. I was having a brilliant conversation with Keith in the office, and he was telling me about our colleagues just before my time, before I got to Historic England, and one of the former inspectors of ancient monuments, Bill Stark, wrote a paper in Antiquity about this, and he likened archaeology to being stranded on a desert island with a bottle of whiskey, and he said you wouldn't drink all the bottle of whiskey at once, no, because once it's gone forever. So instead you take little sips. He basically defined preservation in situ and archaeological sampling by drinking a bottle of whiskey. And it's just like, you know, well, yes, but it's still, whatever happens, it still goes. But if you don't believe in finite and non-renewable resource, it doesn't actually matter, because it actually never runs out, because there's loads of other things you can actually do with it. My favourite part of this process, though, is actually we got really creative in the 1990s. So you got this idea of preservation. Preservation leads to preservation in situ. When we need to dig something up, we're going to sample it. But don't worry, we're actually doing preservation in that, because what we call that process is preservation by record. Okay, archaeologists do preservation by record. What that means is we're going to trash it by digging it up, but we're going to write about it. And we're going to create a nice archive. We're going to put that in the historic environment record, and we're going to put all the artifacts in the museum. And Bob's your uncle, we're done. We've preserved this. Okay? I find it a complete and utter lie. It's not. No, you don't. You've actually completely trashed it. Hopefully, you've done something creative with it, but you've not actually preserved it. And you know, we really do need to challenge what we actually think about this. And you know, this whole idea that everything needs to end up on a historic environment record. Who's the historic environment record for? Who uses it? Is it something the public can easily engage with? Well, frankly, if you can find me a historic environment record that actually does something the public might actually want and enjoy, then I might agree they're really good things. Okay. I'm not saying they're not out there, but I would just say a lot of them leave a lot to be desired. They are records for the archaeologists, produced by experts through expert-managed systems. Okay, we are very expert-heavy. Now, I must say, I find it hardly a compelling product when one, hardly a compelling product, and one that A, is increasingly now overlooked by the academic community because there's just nothing interesting going on in it, and secondly, is completely unfathomable to the wider public. They just can't penetrate this system. And does that really mean we're delivering public value when we actually look at this? Now, again, we've actually been conscious about this, so we want to talk about the non-expert, okay? So, how do we do that? Well, we do outreach. We've created a lovely little word, outreach, and then we call it engagement, and it's this nice little fluffy thing, and it's where I, as an expert, I'll come along and I'll tell this person about what their past is because I'm the expert and they're not, and I've got to use really simple language because they're stupid. Yeah, all right. And we've created this whole discourse about outreach and engagement, which actually, to me, is so often a really belittling process about experts going to other people and just passing over their knowledge without truly engaging it. And the thing that scares me the most about this process, this expert-driven thing, is this concept actually is now embedded in our national planning policy framework. So this is the document that succeeded PP260. And this is what it says in the definition of archaeological interest. There will be archaeological interest in a heritage asset if it holds or potentially may hold evidence of past human activity worthy of expert investigation. Our national policy says archaeological interest is only something that is worthy of expert investigation. I regularly give presentations to community groups, and the first thing I do in that community group is I ask all the expert archaeologists to stand up, and I line them up against a wall. And I turn to everybody in that room, and I say, according to the National Planning Policy Framework, you lot aren't allowed in this room. You're not allowed to have this conversation, because they are the experts. Okay? The other thing I then do is say, well, luckily they're all paid for by the public, so you actually own them, so they're your archaeologists. So stop asking them what you want to do. Tell them what you want to do. Tell them what you're interested in actually doing. Anyway, back to my crisis in archaeology. You've got to understand also, archaeology has never been so well funded. Okay, despite the recent financial crisis, there is oodles and oodles of dosh in archaeology. More money than you can possibly imagine. Okay, and you know, development-led archaeology is responsible for some of the most impressive and groundbreaking finds and funded work. You know, there are some brilliant collaborations with universities, don't get me wrong, it's not all bad. There is some amazing stuff going on. But I really do think there isn't the crisis that is actually being portrayed. Okay, if you think that we've got to absolutely dig everything up that's out there, we've got to deal with everything that development might throw at us, then yes, it's very easy to actually say there is a crisis. Okay? Yes, there aren't enough archaeologists. All right, put it bluntly, there aren't enough archaeologists probably in Europe to deal with the implications of high speed 2. Okay? If you dug everything on high speed 2, it would employ all the archaeologists in Europe. Okay? Excellent, let's do that. Let's just employ them all. Let's sort it out. Okay? Slight problem with doing that is probably there actually aren't enough museums to actually put all the material in. Okay, that's fine, we'll get High Speed 2 to buy a new museum. We'll just buy one, we'll call it High Speed 2, and we'll just stuff everything in there. Sorted. Yep, happy with that? Okay, we'll then go to the academic sector, and we'll ask all these academics, do you have enough actual lecturers and academics to look at all this material? Slight problem. There aren't actually enough academics to look at all this material. So who are we digging it all up for? Why are we digging all this material up? Could we do something different? Should we just take the money and do something interesting and just leave the archaeology behind? Why do we have to do all this archaeology? One of the best pieces of research I've ever read was by my own wonderful organisation. And we wrote a report about the number of archaeologists needed to meet future development demands. This came out last year. And it actually says that in order to meet the future development demands in England, we are going to need 25% to 64% more archaeologists. Okay, so I've got that. 25 to 64% more. I'm sorry, I hate maths, I'm not a mathematician, but that is a strangely precise yet broad figure. Which is it, 25%? 64? Didn't want to round it up to 65. It's just a meaningless figure, really, to me, and again, I don't really understand it. We've seen some brilliant reports, the British Academy, Reflections on Archaeology, highlighting the crisis between the disjunction between the professional sector and the academic sector. Yet it fundamentally fails to make the point that there aren't enough of them in the academic sector to deal with all the material being produced anyway, so what do we actually do about that? And also all these documents fail to consider the eventual the essential third part of the sector, the public, and what they can actually offer. Okay, so yes, we can increase the number of archaeologists, but the conversation just becomes a secular one. Who are we doing it for? What we're doing with all the material? How we're going to look after it all? Who's going to pay for all that? If you think every archive box costs between £20 and £50 to actually put in storage, it's a serious lot of money. Someone's actually got to lift it. But I think there's a completely different way of looking at this, and it's about a different understanding of the public value of archaeology, the public engagement in the past. And I think this is a far more dynamic thing. And I'm absolutely convinced we don't actually have to dig everything up. We don't have to record anything. But, you know, we don't actually have to make lists of stuff. Okay? And actually, some of the material, we could do really creative things. Why don't we make a mosaic out of it? Why don't we throw it away? Actually, I'll have quite a lot of it because I like building stupid things in my garden with it. Yeah? It's about stories and how you make creativity out of it. It doesn't have to be this product that says you need an academic report at the end of it, you need to archive it. We can actually do things differently. That, fundamentally, is the role of the heritage manager, the person who talks about the cultural value of this material and what you actually do with it. I personally believe this role will enable us to deliver far greater impact and far greater public benefits. It's about understanding what do we want out of our interventions. The way we talk about it now, if a development comes along, it's got an archaeological consequence, we say we're going to develop an archaeological mitigation scheme. Okay? It's turgid language, and it's all about how you dig the stuff up. Okay? I don't want to do mitigation. I want to ask myself, what is the legacy of my intervention? Okay? What am I going to get out by intervening somewhere? Okay? And there you can enter into a whole world of different cultural values and cultural meaning and also cultural creativity. Because ultimately, that's personally where I believe we should be. So, if we're going to address this crisis that we have perceived in archaeology, we have two options. We can carry on crying foul and begging for more money and doing everything the same way, or we can actually have a really conscious reassessment of our own process, what it is we want to actually get out. So I believe in the new approach. I believe in doing it differently because I just don't think we're ever going to get out of the treadmill otherwise. I've always understood archaeology as a process, a way of exploring and asking questions about the material culture we encounter, the people who created it, used it, abandoned it, lost it. It's about the people who rediscover it, the people who want to own it again, the people who don't want to own it again, the people who care, the people who don't care. It's about people. Archaeology is not an end product, it's just part of a process. Yet sometimes it really struggles with this. It likes to define itself as the discipline that gives answers to our questions about the past. I often encounter archaeologists who tell facts about the past as if they've uncovered the truth and that they have written history and that history will remain in place forevermore. And I find it really interesting because to me that completely downplays our greatest asset in archaeology has, and that is the ability to ask, set and explore a whole load of questions about a place. Our greatest thing we do is ask questions. Why do we try and actually, formally answer them in such a rigid way? I think we should be more comfortable with the question process and just leaving questions there and seeing where questions might take you, where the journey might lead to in the end. Immerse yourself in the actual process and glorify in this idea that archaeology and heritage value is entirely subjective and that everyone can have a different opinion and everyone can actually engage in getting that across. I think this whole subjectivity is our greatest opportunity to engage with people because it becomes about their place, their story, their past and their society. It's about helping them to develop the tools to shape and ask the questions they want to about their place, to investigate the things they want to explore and discover. I'm often struck just by how limited the audience is for some of our professional work, yet how huge and wide-ranging the enthusiasm is for the subject as a whole. People are fascinated by this idea of who do you think you are and what's my story and where's my place. Yet again, I've mentioned we belittle this professionally to this subcategory of academic excellence known as outreach and engagement. But you know, the most powerful bit, we just push it away as it's something that isn't actually something, you know, like it's unclean. I just find that really extraordinary. All the engagements I've had with members of the public have been deeply uplifting moments. And have been deeply creative, and they've been about me as much as they've been about them and the conversation we might go and where they might actually end up. Now, I'm not putting down rigorous academic endeavour. Okay, it is absolutely important. It's an essential part of our work. What I'm trying to do is redefine what we think our outputs might be, and in many ways, I would actually say we've got two very simple outputs that we should be focusing on. The first is knowledge gain. There's absolutely no doubt archaeology as a discipline is all about knowledge gain. How are we gaining knowledge? How are we gaining knowledge about the material that's left from the past to help inform us about that material and about the people? And I really do believe that's really fundamental. But my second output is all about people, and it's about doing it. And it's about the enjoyment of doing it and the excitement of doing it. And just doing it, not getting obsessed with how you're recording it, not getting obsessed if you're meeting a certain standard, not getting obsessed if it's going to end up in a museum. There are other things you can actually do with it. And what's fascinating when you look at it like that, there are three key sectors that engage in archaeology across that board. There's the academic community, all about knowledge gain. That's absolutely so important. There is development-led archaeology, okay, and then there is this wider public archaeology. And my real concern is they're so disjointed at the moment. They are actually not working with each other. They're not actually engaging across the board properly. So you have a deeply fragmented process. Those people who sit in their little professional bubble are doing their bit, okay? The academics are doing their bit, and the public are just left slightly floundering. I'm really fascinated in this entire conversation is how do we bring these sectors together so that they can start a conversation? Because ultimately all of this process requires thinking room. It requires headspace about how you actually do it. The thing I find also really disappointing in the whole conversation about this is nothing about what I'm saying is new. Okay? It is now 20 years ago since English Heritage, as was, wrote Power of Place and the government responded with a Force for Our Future. It's 10 years ago that we, Historic England, wrote Historic England's conservation principles. Okay? And conservation principles, the first two principles, are all about what I'm talking about. The historic environment is a shared resource and everyone should be able to participate in sustaining it. They're the two first principles of conservation principles. Okay? Well, frankly, we failed to do that. And there's a simple reason why we failed. And that is, we have been really clever and all we've done is change our language. So when the government agenda changed, localism comes along, engaging the public comes along, we just change our language and say, well, that's all right, we do outreach, we do public engagement. But I can tell you, having been in the sector through this entire time, our practice has not changed. We are still as expert-driven as ever. Okay, and what's fascinating, historically, we're about to go through another change process. Yeah, and I'm dying for someone to say, yeah, we've got to change our language, because yeah, okay, change our language, but it doesn't actually change anything. When are we actually going to change our purpose and our outputs and how we actually do? So I've mentioned, I personally believe there are two areas we've got to move into. The public benefit derived by knowledge gain, what we actually gain by intervening in the past, and then the public benefit derived by doing it. The social interaction, the process, the fun, the skills need to do that. How you tell my story, my place, who I am. Okay? We're really good at doing the first. We could do it better. We sometimes focus too much on it, sometimes expect too much material. Do we do the second part of the process? No, I really don't think we do. I don't think we do it well, and I don't think we do it meaningfully, and I think we could do so much more. There's huge amounts of potential there. I'm arguing this because I just can't see that we have the resources to deal properly with the first part of the process. Actually doing archaeology properly in this country, we can't afford it. And actually, we're not actually doing it properly already, okay? I can guarantee most of the excavations that happen in this country aren't written up properly, they aren't archived properly according to standards, and they certainly don't end up in museums. There could be some very, very interesting shed fires over the next few years that will probably do for most of England's historic archaeological archive. Okay, we have it in Bradford when there's mill buildings around. It's called our Bradford solution. They suddenly go up in flames. Yeah, it's a real issue. This stuff is not looked after properly. Okay, so we can't say we can even do our current process. We need to really explore that. And I would say this is what I think we should do. I think we should redefine our purpose. I think we should actually be comfortable with this idea that we can choose what we do. We can choose what we excavate. We can choose what we research. We don't actually have to do it all. We don't have to dig everything. Okay? And just maybe by doing less, we might actually do more better. Okay? We might actually massively increase our impact, our purpose, and then ultimately our legacy. Okay? What might happen if we agreed this? So, what might that actually look like? Well, you know, why aren't we setting up archaeology as the largest laboratory for citizen science in the country? Okay, why aren't we mobilising all these people to go out and actually start looking at the questions and some of the issues that we actually want to do? Why aren't we making debate about what research questions we want public focused? Why aren't we asking them? Why aren't we changing to be the expert as facilitator, a friendly advocate, a champion for the public? Okay. If we allowed ourselves to consider the wider impact, broaden that conversation, to be more about who we think we are and about how we derive understanding of our places and meaning, I genuinely do believe we might unlock the full potential of heritage. But also, I just don't think there's any other environmental sector that has what we've got to offer, that has that continuous conversation in the manner we do. Okay, I often tell my team we must go out to talk to local heritage groups. Okay, and what we need to do when we go to local heritage groups is we need to go and find the GP, and we need to get the GP to come along, because actually by keeping those heritage groups together, frankly, we are helping to offset the early onset of senile dementia, because quite frankly, most of them are over 65. Yeah. Okay, and they're getting on a bit, and actually what we're doing is we're giving them a whole load of creativity. There's so many different ways we can take the language and the conversation. There's a site I've just been dealing with in Thorn, in Doncaster, which has got a Motte and Bailey castle. For the last 20 years, we've been trying to stop them build a supermarket next to it, where the supermarket would back onto this beautiful monument, a lovely, you know, proper motte, and it looks absolutely fantastic. And all everyone wanted, huge supermarket, and just forget about the monument. Okay, and eventually what we actually did is we convinced them not to build a supermarket there, but to build an extra care housing facility there. So it's now going to have a 70-bed extra care facility. And the other thing we did is we actually got them not to face the extra care facility away from the monument. It actually faces into the monument, partly goes around it, and they've designed the monument to be in their garden. Okay, because what I want to happen is I want the GP to actually prescribe to each of those elderly residents twice around the motte every single day as part of their health and fitness regime, because it's their place and their lives. It's not just about the academic thing. These are physical things that belong to us all. How do we actually use them? That's my feeling of what public benefit is. And as I said, I don't think any other environmental sector's got that. Ultimately, it's about moving away from creating lists of stuff. It's about moving away from dull, tedious, meaningless heritage desk-based assessments and heritage audits. They say little, they mean nothing to nobody. They have absolutely no community ownership in there. Okay? They don't help define anything of public value. Frankly, they are just a waste of money and time. What we need to do is understand we are fundamentally a creative industry. We are about creating and sustaining cultural value and recognising it. And I passionately believe in a process that is based on creativity and not preservation. Right, that's what I've got to say. I have actually got one case study for you that I was going to show. How am I doing for time?
5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Which I thought would be really useful to actually show you this case study. I actually gave this at the Chartered Institute of Field Archaeologists this year, and it is a project that I've been dealing with at the moment. And it's about digging up the Roman A1 Deer Street in Yorkshire. So over the last 20 years, over 60 miles of the former line of Deer Street and Ermine Street in Yorkshire has been made from the A1 into a motorway. And for the last 5 years, I've been dealing with a section that roughly runs from Catterick to Scotch Corner. Okay, and it's been a fascinating process, and I've learned a lot, and I've lost a lot of hair. I found a shed load. Honestly, we're talking millions now, which is really great. But also, it actually highlights the entire nightmare of the process that I've just explained to you. Okay, so we know lots about this road. We've dug up lots. Yeah, 20 years of excavations. You get walking, socking, great big tomes. They're fantastic. You know, these prop up my bookshelf at work. They're fantastic. So we know a lot about this landscape. The section we were really interested in this time was at Catterick, which is where this red splodges are down here. We knew a lot about it. Anyone know what this is at the bottom here? Anyone want to shout out what they think that is? A barn? A house? A building? No? You're all a shy lot, aren't you? Okay, that's a Roman bathhouse. Or rather, that was a Roman bathhouse until the A1 in 1950 went straight through the middle of it and it was demolished. Okay? So our road was going straight through this area and we were going to upgrade it. All right, and that looked like this. So nice big new road coming through this middle bit, all the black bits which were destroyed in the 1950s, and we were going to put our road in. We did a cracking job at the beginning of this road scheme because we actually negotiated a solution where instead of making the cutting wider and doing lots of archaeology, they just straightened the edges out. Okay, so all the archaeology had already been destroyed and we weren't going to do any archaeology. I was so happy. Okay, multi-million-pound road scheme, no archaeology, through an archaeological site where the top 3 meters of the embankment was solid Roman archaeology. Okay, that was my first mistake. Okay, because of course what I then met was the engineer, and I came across this great concept called design and build road schemes. Okay, so when they first spoke to me, they actually hadn't finished designing the road. Okay, because they were designing it as they were building it. Design and build. Okay, so all I then got into was 3 years of constant engineering changes that actually took our archaeological bill, okay, ultimately from 2 million to 12 million pounds. Okay, not bad going really. So this is just some of the archaeology we actually had to deal with. It's 3 meters deep stratigraphy. I can't tell you the insanity of why we had to do it. I had to do all this archaeology, not for the road. The road wasn't going here. Okay, no, it needed a drain next to it. Okay, and of course, by the time the drain got to this location, the engineer said the drain needs to be 6 meters below the ground. And I said, well, that's all my archaeology. And he said, no, yeah, no, it's got to go there. And he said, well, look, you said 2 months ago, you said you were going to put it in this former drain that was put there in the 1960s. Oh, we forgot about that. And it's just like, well, how can they? So, huge amounts of impact. And it just went on. Oh, we did have some unforeseen things. 220 Roman burials, the largest rural Roman burial in the north of England, just came up. It had a bit of a problem. So, yeah, there was some unforeseen stuff, but it was in a scheduled monument. Okay, so we did know there were Romans around in this landscape. We then, most amazingly, found this site at Scotch Corner. Okay, and this site at Scotch Corner is a Roman settlement from probably about AD 60 to AD 90. Now, you know your Roman history, that's 10 years before the Romans were supposed to be in this part of the country. Okay, and the material that was actually found here is so extraordinary, quite a number of the pieces have only ever been found in Pompeii. What was they doing here? That's interesting. 10 years before the Romans came, and such value that we've only ever found parallels in Pompeii. Okay. Now, there's a whole different reason and a different story why that went on. It's actually really fascinating, and that's another conversation, including finding there we found all these Iron Age coin pellet moulds, the most northerly example. God, archaeologists love this, don't they? The best, the biggest, the most north. Absolutely fantastic. So we found iron production. Okay, this is Scotch Corner. If you're really clever, you can actually see a legionary fortress up there. But hey ho, don't want to just count on suspicions. What's the legionary fortress potentially doing at Scotch Corner? Nobody ever knew that. Loads of archaeology. Whiz back down. We then suddenly they came across and they said, oh well, we need to build our new bridge abutment. It's going to be bigger, and actually suddenly we found lots of archaeology and it's all in the way. I said, okay, that's fine. We'll just do a nice sample. Even me, yeah, we'll do a sample and we'll look after it like that. And then they said, yeah, we want to put soil nails in it. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to hold the edge back. And I said, that's fantastic. So we don't have to do any archaeology. No, that's fine. I said, what do your soil nails look like? And they said, oh, well, they're 11 meters long. Okay, so I kid you not, in the top 3 meters, they wanted to put 2 rows of soil nails 11 meters deep into the archaeology. So I said, well, okay, right, fine. Completely trashing the archaeology there. People are going to have to do an excavation. I think that bit cost them about £1 million. So that was quite exciting. This is the archaeology doing it. It was on speed next to a 4-lane motorway. It's completely dangerous. It was absolutely hairy. Great fun. They then really crazy things. They needed to replace all the telegraph poles. Okay. Now in 3 meter deep archaeology, okay, there's no point having a tiny little square hole because you don't learn anything. So I say I need a 2 meter square hole at the bottom of your hole for your pole. Okay. But obviously health and safety then comes in and says, well, if you go down more than 1.5 meters, you've got to put a step in. Okay, so that is the hole required to build that pole. Okay, bonkers! Don't tell me I'm doing something for research here. Okay, I am just, this is madness. This is massive destruction on a huge scale. The next one we had, this was absolutely fantastic. Yorkshire Water had a sewage drain. Yeah, it was there. It was perfect. Built in the 60s, concrete, absolutely lovely. Because Highways England were going to widen the road to sit on top of that sewage drain. Yeah, Yorkshire Water were entirely in their right by an Act of Parliament to require Highways England to build a brand new sewer right next to the road, so that they would never have to go under the embankment to repair it. Okay, £600,000 worth of archaeology. I told them they don't want to do it, and they did it. And they couldn't stop it. So there was no research reason for actually digging that hole. It was utterly sad. The original pipe just stayed in the ground. Okay, and they built a new one right next door to it. Some of this stuff is utterly bonkers. Okay, and you just see the figures going up, and you actually completely get crazy. Now, the really sad thing is none of this was any of the mitigation about the public. Okay, we forced them to hold some public open days and actually get the public out there and actually get the public talking to them. But all the archaeology is done behind closed doors. There's a really good reason. It's a very dangerous site. It's next to a live motorway. But so we had to bring the public in really small ways. But the other thing that I found really fascinating about this road scheme is its entire inability to talk about the place in heritage terms where it's going through. Okay, so this is the A1 we were upgrading. And one of the best things about this road is it actually forms the parish boundary of about 30 parishes through North Yorkshire. Okay, because the A1, being Roman, has been a cultural, physical and intellectual barrier for 2,000 years. There are no footpaths crossing this road, because there never was, okay? Because people related to it differently. Villages and their settlements came up to the edge of it. They never traditionally crossed it, okay? And I said right from the beginning, why aren't we having a conversation with each of the parishes about what this means for each of the parishes? Why aren't we creating teaching collections for every single one of the parish schools when we're engaging this? And you know what? When I asked the heritage consultants, why don't we do this? Oh, that's not archaeology. That's nothing to do with us. Okay? And I'm saying this is why the A1's here. This is what it means. This is a fundamental part of our cultural landscape. And it's absolutely fascinating when you actually see how we write about this stuff. When you see how we write about engaging the community, the Southport Review, when you see about how we write up about archaeological sites, it's all artifact based. It's all about very academic knowledge and misses an element of creativity. I mean, my favourite one is this flipping chariot burial. Okay, this was on another bit of the A1. We should never have dug this up. Okay, it was actually on an aerial photograph as a square barrow, and someone just didn't record it. Okay, and the reason why it was dug up wasn't because of a road. It was because it was going to be there was a drain going to go through the middle of it. And I said, well, you can't just leave a drain through it, so you're going to have to go through the middle. But the best thing about this chariot wasn't actually when we dug it up. It was actually when my lovely colleague at the back there, Dr. Keith Emmerich, was driving to see his beloved Huddersfield town. And he was driving on the M62, and he was caught speeding. Yes, he was caught speeding, and he was pulled over. He had to go and sit in the back of the police car with these two policemen, and very reluctantly he was asked, "What do you do, sir?" And he said, very he hates saying this. He says, "I'm an archaeologist." At which moment, one of the policemen went into sheer ecstasy and sheer excitement, and oh God, I love archaeology, love archaeology. Did you have anything to do with that chariot burial at Ferrybridge? At which moment his partner then chimes in and going, "Oh my God, please don't talk to me about that." He makes me go and sit on this bridge overlooking the site of the Ferrybridge henge every single morning, okay, looking at this landscape and talking about how people might live there in the prehistoric period. Okay. Well, really interestingly, the drain was constructed for the access road to that bridge. That bridge was constructed so that police cars could turn around, drive the other way up and down the A1. Okay, and my point was this: maybe that Iron Age chariot burial was actually the policeman of his day, and that is the conversation we should be having. It was brilliant. This guy, with no training whatsoever, was talking about that landscape, talking about how the sun rose every morning. I'd never been there when the sun was rising, yet he was having that conversation. And then just finally, the other thing that we did on the A1 that was brilliant, that wasn't part of the main project, was we got involved with Operation Nightingale. If you know Catterick, it's where Catterick Garrison's based. It's the largest British garrison site in the country. Okay, and we did two things with them. One, we worked with Operation Nightingale, so that's the rehabilitation of ex-servicemen and women, and we used archaeology as a way of helping them rehabilitate themselves back into society. And we also did had some conversations about what we might do with the Gurkhas. So there's a huge Gurkha community. And one of the really interesting things we wanted to do, and Keith was really instrumental in actually setting this conversation up as well, was actually asking the Gurkha community what it was like to come from a foreign country and to be stationed at Catterick. What did they bring? What artefacts did they bring? Because that's what all the Roman soldiers did when they came here 2,000 years ago. And couldn't we have really interesting conversation about what artefacts and what things were really, really important to them? And brilliantly, what it turned out is the thing that was most important to them wasn't their sword, wasn't any of their buttons, wasn't any of their money. They didn't mind losing that stuff. What was really important was a small piece of cloth material that was given to them by a family member. And what happens is that cloth is so that the family member feels that they've come away with the person. Okay, so actually carrying it around becomes really, really symbolic. And what's absolutely fascinating is that the thing that survives in the archaeological record? No. Okay, so again, how might we then have a conversation with something about the archaeological record? We spoke to some ex-servicemen from Afghanistan, and their brilliant recollection was that actually when they were in Afghanistan, the most valuable possession they had, okay, were CDs. Okay, the least valuable possession they had were CD cases. So if we're archaeologists and go to Afghanistan, what are we going to find? We're going to find lots of CD cases and no CDs, and we're going to be completely confused about what they are. But what an opportunity to take them to a site and say, well, I don't know what this is, I don't know what this is, what do you think of this? How do you think it might be used? Because they're experiencing exactly the same thing. And this is public engagement, this is archaeology on a completely different level, with a completely different set of meanings that I think is where we should be. So, there we go. Done.
Thank you so much, Neil. As we expected, that was full of ideas, thoughtful comments, provocations, and some great examples as well. So we have time for some questions. Yes.
Thanks, John. Hi, Neil. Jack Saxton. I've just finished my masters in medieval archaeology. I've got 30 years experience, just 30 months in archaeology, so I was lucky enough in the dissertation to be asking some of those groups we talked about, academic archaeologists, professional archaeologists, which is a different phrase used, the commercial guy, PASS, British Museum, etc. And I must say, some of the feedback I got was just reaffirming what you said. Heritage Lottery Fund, 98% of the public had never heard of it. 97% didn't know how much was allocated to HLF, even though it's the government route to heritage protection. And those people who guess what amount came from the National Lottery Fund to HLF, I guess between £1 and £5 million per annum. And as a consequence of that, we're not interested in where the money was spent. After interviewing them, when I told them it was £500 million per annum, they wanted to know what it was spent on. They were ignorant of it. But when I looked at the Historic England feedback in interviews with your colleagues, and certainly looked at the phraseology, or forgive me for putting on the spot, bearing in mind 30 months experience in archaeology, we were right to do so. Historic England is the white knight of heritage. It portrays itself as being able to formalise listings, processes, and how to go about the things you, forgive me for misunderstood, profess is slowing us down. And my question, there are two questions. Firstly, PPG came into effect before most people in this room had to report. So why has Historic England taken so long and not sorted these problems out? And professes that we need to do things differently. And the second part of that question would be, given the substantial costs attributed to the public operation, and I'm talking specifically pensions in that side of Historic England and English heritage, and given the fact that the majority of employees here are paid to be here, is it time that perhaps one of the solutions that you portray is passed over from some of the professional archaeologists to the academics, so that we can bridge that gap and provide some of these solutions on your behalf? And forgive me, it just seems from my age, 30 years is an awful long time to come to recognise these issues.
Okay, excellent. I don't think we've recognised there's some issues. I've recognised there's some issues, but this is, again, I'm presenting this is my view, in a sense, it's my personal view about where we are. I don't think academia is the answer at all because of numerous things. I don't think Historic England is the professional sector. The Chartered Institute for Archaeologists would say it's the professional sector. I'm still struggling to work out who stands up for the public in any of this discussion, because we've not mentioned them. They're really, really important. I think we're scared about the implications of the questions that, well, certainly some of the questions that I asked, some of the questions that you've asked, because the answers aren't pretty. The answers aren't going to be wholly wonderful. So we're scared about how to actually deal with that. But again, my point is I just don't think we should be going there. I think we should be trying to define a new purpose, actually not worrying about all that. We're never going to deal with it. Okay, and actually, archaeological backlog and not writing archaeological stuff up is as old as the hills with archaeology. Yeah, some of the greatest archaeologists in this country died before they'd written anything up. Yeah, so why do we? Because sometimes shouldn't be so obsessed with it. Maybe we should actually try and create a product that enables us to do things quicker, more easily, in a much more engaging manner. And that's my problem with the discourse at the moment. To me, it's actually all process driven. It's all about the process that we've actually got, and none of it is about the product we want, the thing we want to do. And I think that's where the conversation, personally, that's where the conversation is.
We'll go to Rob at the back first, then we'll start working our way forward. Rob.
Thank you, Neil. It was a fantastic presentation. I should say, I work for the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists and for the Council of British Archaeology, so I'm one of those professional people. You'll be pleased to know that I agree wholeheartedly with everything you've said. Now, in the course of my work, I find myself sitting in various meetings, quite frequently, where we are discussing what we as the sector should do to respond to various challenges in legislation, in policy, the crisis in archaeological staffing, the kinds of things that we're talking about, these are things that we talk about in the meeting. Now, there is a split in the room, I don't know, 90% to 10% of the people who I would term the realists, who say, we can't deal with the big fundamental questions at the moment because A, the government don't want to hear about it at the moment, B, we haven't got the money or the opportunity to ask those kinds of questions, it won't work. And then the 10% who say, but actually we've got to, you know, they're saying the things that you want to do. You're not alone, that's a great thing. The reaction that the realists have to the mavericks is that they roll their eyes and they say, we just don't want to deal with you. So my question to you is, how do we get the realists and the mavericks together? How do we give the mavericks a vehicle or a place where they can help to define what is going to come next? Like the people prior to PPG 16 came up with the thing that was to happen next, which was to answer the fundamental challenge of the day, which was how do we get some archaeology done in this process where there's a crisis of funding. We have a fundamental challenge now that you've just defined. What's the avenue to take forward in those conversations?
Okay. My feeling is we've got to get the realists to actually understand it's going to happen no matter what they're doing. Yeah, there are organisations and institutions who are doing some of this work who are just not going to wait any longer. They're not going to wait for it to get sorted. Yeah, and that's going to be around the entire infrastructure discussion. Yeah, the capacity and issue around infrastructure is going to, I personally see, we'll see some very radical things happen there, and I'm quite confident. I think they could be quite interesting. Okay, I think it's not surprising where the 5 largest commercial units are. Unsurprisingly, are almost always co-located with very good university departments. Okay, there's real opportunity. Why aren't we actually doing more about that? Yeah, I think there needs to be much better public benefit leadership. Okay, and to me that is about looking at how we get the academic stuff and we get the professional stuff, and actually we be more creative with the product that's actually created, and not put it all in museums, but actually do other, in a sense, other things with it. So actually, I think there's a lot more commonality in the conversation than you imagine. It's just they won't. They are forced in some ways to carry on asking. We've got to ask the question about professional standards because that's what we exist to do. And actually, you can say to them, no, you don't. So again, with community groups, one of the ways I get around this is I want archaeology on scheduled monuments, but what I will need is a research strategy, what the questions, and I'll need some minimum archaeological standards. And then who does it? We can have loads of people doing it. If you've got a good question, it's a valid thing to ask, we might get some knowledge out of it, then we can actually explore it. And I think, in a sense, we've got to be brave and actually go to that step.
Yes. Yes. Yes, easy.
So, I found out what you were saying about outputs. So you mentioned maximising knowledge in what we do, but also when involving the public, we shouldn't bother too much about getting hung up about records.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you kind of also expressed your disapproval at some excavations not keeping records. So I just wonder where you stand with that.
That's all. Nothing was supposed to be consistent. No. Okay, right.
Yeah, and how you hope to kind of integrate the two.
Right. Okay. Knowledge and archaeological records are not the same thing. Yeah. All right. Because I can go onto an archaeological site and meet someone who can tell me something completely different about somewhere miles away, and that can increase my knowledge. Yeah, knowledge is about us as well as individuals and human beings. So my point again about knowledge is it's the totality of knowledge and all the things we might explore. There are some places we go to intervene, and the best example I would give you is Star-Car, where actually we know the ability of us to try and gather as much of it now is our only chance of actually doing that. So actually having a good record does become really, really important. And I actually remember being at university and being able to use Graham Clark's and Paul Mellor's works to reinterpret Star Car. Would I have been able to if Clark hadn't written it up in the manner that he'd written it up? Yeah. But again, wouldn't we then not have different ways of actually reinterpreting it if we hadn't actually done it? So again, it's actually, there isn't a black and white answer between them, because sometimes you actually do need to do those things. But we don't need to do it at every single site. Not every single site is Star Car. So maybe a photograph might do. Yeah. So that, my point is, we're not going to extract the same knowledge out of every single place. Okay. The whole thing about the A1 is you get into laws of diminishing returns. How many Roman buildings in Catterick do I need to dig to understand the layout of a Roman building? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now do I need to dig a fifth of the settlement, a sixth of the settlement, half the settlement? I might find subtle differences between the functions that were going in all of those, but do I need to actually do more? And again, this is where this whole conversation about what do you sample, how much do you sample? My frustration about Catterick is none of the interventions were led by questions. They were all led, if you don't do it, we're going to trash it. Which is, yet I'm partly then required to say, oh yes, we're doing a lot of learning out of this, and we're learning lots, and it's been really good. I've actually got to thank Highways England for the £12 million of archaeology they've done. Yeah, I can guarantee they didn't thank me when they stood up and put a press release out saying that archaeological delays had cost £37 million. Yeah, and they didn't want to hear me when I said, no, the archaeologists didn't cost any of those delays. Your engineers, by changing their designs, cost those delays. And so again, you get into this difficult argument about where you actually are. But I just try and separate, what is knowledge gain. Yeah, it doesn't, don't think it's what the archaeologist says the knowledge is. There's lots of knowledge in that place that can come out in different ways. Does that answer your question? Thanks.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. Yes.
Hi there. As someone who's been trying to kind of convince commercial units in the last couple of years to try and communicate with the public, I thought your talk was very interesting. I think it's, commercial units are overwhelmingly responsible for the archaeology that goes on in the UK, and fundamentally it's all about money. So how do you think that factors in? Do you think there's ever going to be a way that they can, rather than just tick a quota or tick a box to say they've done a minimal amount of outreach, do you think there's going to be a way of convincing these people without significant legislative change to actually try and engage with the communities?
Okay, personally, I just don't think they can get any understanding of a place without engaging with community. From where does the sun come up? Some fundamental questions like that. You're looking at where the entrance to a roundhouse is. Maybe it's actually where the sun comes up. And unless you're there for generations, you don't learn these things. Places, there are values locked up in places that people lock up. So there's a really fulfilling thing about that engagement. But the other thing is, it's actually not hard. It's so easy. And all you need to do is just change your perception. Change how you open the question in the morning. Yeah? At the moment, we teach everyone to ask the archaeological question first. Have I got my mantle chart? Have I got the right colour? Yeah, that's what we look at. Have I drawn it right? Or why don't you actually just look at it and say, look around, why are the birds flying today? Because there's all that adds to the knowledge about where this thing is and where it's actually going. So my personal thing is that it's so sad they find it hard. It's actually really easy. Yeah, and as soon as you ask the first question, it never stops. You just keep rolling from one to the other, and actually your products become so much better. And again, we've seen that with projects we're now setting up. There are people who are brilliant at it. John Kenny, who used to be at York Archaeological Trust, sort of set himself up now. And actually, with some units, we just say, get him in. So at Thorn, he's managed their Facebook page, he's managed all their interactions, stuff, he's managed their blogs, and it's brilliant. And the community love it. They absolutely love it because they feel informed. And you know what? The developers loved it as well. Why? Because they're building an extra care facility that's all about looking after people. Yeah, and they use every opportunity to try and sell one of the flats. Fine. But I've always seen it as this place where we're creating a place for a conversation between the elder residents and the school on the other side of the monument. So actually all that stuff is a really important sense. And the thing that actually came out of all of that is the archaeological consultant for that scheme we've become really, really good friends. And his comment to me when he did it was like, Neil, I never knew I could ask these questions. Yeah? We actually allowed them to dig the biggest hole I've ever allowed in a scheduled monument. I found nothing archaeological. It's really weird. Just found natural, which was we weren't quite expecting, but it was really, really informative. But it was huge, this hole. And he said we couldn't understand why you'd go for it. And I said, because we've got all these questions, and I want you to answer them, and I want you to talk about the public. And by the time he just said, wow, it was actually a meaningful piece of work. Yeah, we have development, and it's about getting to that point. So it's absolutely academic, professional, and that public have to come together. We've got to create that place where they can have that conversation. That is where the value is.
Any final questions? Yes.
Do you think you said there's three aspects of that conversation? I really think perhaps that there's four. In fact, that there's the developers, which you just touched on, as the public, because I think there's a sense that we have this polluter pays policy. You have to make that argument to the person paying for the archaeology that we want to do these things, and I know that former colleagues have found making that case very difficult. Depending on the developer, and you're quite lucky, in fact, we've had quite receptive people to work with, but there are some people out there who will just put their foot down and go, oh, pay for community outreach. Why do I have to do that? That's not part of the planning process. NPPF doesn't say I have to do that. Do you think we need to lose the polluter pays policy in order to actually really progress this conversation?
I think we need to redefine mitigation. So I think the most damaging thing is that definition of archaeological interest that says it's about experts. It's not. It's about everyone can be. Or we have to actually really come to saying, well, everyone's an expert, and actually everyone can engage. And so where I have a real problem in our organisation where we're moving is outreach is not seen as mitigation for development management. Not seen as it. Well, I've just shown you, hopefully, that all that stuff, all those conversations are about a legacy from an intervention that is about knowledge gain, experience gain, it's adding value. And actually, we have written the definition of what archaeological mitigation is. We are responsible, not the developer, we are responsible for putting ourselves in that straitjacket and boxing ourselves in. Yeah? And it's that point. You open your mind to what mitigation might be, what your legacy might be, the way you engage it. None of those boundaries actually exist, and you have those conversations with developers because you say, actually, I don't care about digging that, I want to do this. And again, at Thorn, what was so important is we started with research strategy. Yeah? And in that research strategy, and I've done it at another site, I actually got them to ask questions that were not within their red line boundary. Because I said, by doing this, you are delivering public value immediately. Our strategy is all of this. We're going to go with that. This is our strategy. And actually, that's the concept they actually bought into. So it was less archaeology in one place, maybe a bit more in another, but it's about that totality.
Because one point was they had 30 years of this mindset as well, and that's how archaeology is conducted.
Sorry, we reinforce it with documents like this. We wrote this because we're so scared that the developers will finally wake up and say, why the hell are we paying all this money? Yeah? So we wrote a document that becomes self-justifying, that actually has this chariot burial in it, yeah, glorifying in it, actually has some of the square barrow cemeteries that are being found in Pocklington are in this document, despite the fact there are absolutely there's not enough money in the developer from the development to actually pay for the implications of those excavations. We mask over the fact the current system is not working. Yeah? And ultimately, that developer shouldn't get his planning permission if he hasn't done the process, right? Because actually what he is getting with his planning permission, yeah, is the need to deliver the public benefit of archaeology. Under our current system, that's an archive, that's a report, and that's the stuff stuck in a museum. It's not happening. So why are we granting anyone planning permission? Why are we discharging their archaeological conditions? Yeah? Are we ever going to solve that problem? I greatly doubt it. So again, it comes back to this thing that actually the definition is in our own hands. We shouldn't be beholden on others. We can change this.
Okay, I think this debate could go on, but I think we do have to draw a line under it at this stage. I think, though, that there's a move. Jill, are you going for a... That's reopened? Oh, that's tomorrow, isn't it? So just bear with us while we. Old Star Inn. Okay. Okay. So, and you're happy to go?
Yes.
from-
Yes.
yeah, okay, so Neil will be going for a drink and to eat, probably with a number of people at the Old Star Inn. And traditionally with these things, you're very welcome to go along as well, and you get a chance to continue the conversation with Neil. Huge thank you to Neil for a very provocative and thoughtful presentation that will have us all thinking for a while, I'm sure. So thank you to Neil. Thank you, Megan, for organising the technology and setting everything up. And finally, before we give Neil a final round of applause, next week we've got, Neil has just come from around the corner for this seminar tonight. Next week we've got Tracy Ireland coming from, well, she's not actually coming from Canberra to give the talk, but she is in the UK, but she is from Canberra in Australia, and she'll be talking here this time next week. So Neil, thank you very much for your presentation.